Welcome, everybody. I'm joined by Andy Talaga, and we're here to talk about tracking. So, tracking is when you keep track of high destiny cards or sometimes low destiny cards for a specific objective. So, we thought this would be fun to use real gameplay that Andy played in to sort of see how to track cards effectively, what cards you can kind of use, and just some really basic examples. So, I think we're going to cue up this video and then we're going to kind of walk you through what's going on so you can kind of think about how to track destinies.
Yeah, definitely. Tracking is a very important skill at leveling up your game. If you're tracking and your opponent's not, you're probably going to win the game. So this is just a really very simple, quick primer on how to track what it is and an example here. I on my own YouTube channel, I put up like an hour-long video about tracking, and it goes very in depth. If you're very interested in learning more about it, you can check that out. But this example is in that video because it's a very clear example of how to track. But so where we're at is this is going to be the end of a battle here. Let's play. So it's on 3x speed. This part of the battle doesn't really matter. What matters is kind of what happens right after the battle to set up the next turn. So just kind of missed it, but I had an Abyssin Ornament, this card, in my hand, and I played Abyssin Ornament. So Abyssin Ornament is a used interrupt and has a destiny of 5. I'm using it for this OR function, which is search your reserve deck and take 1 non-unique alien into hand and reshuffle. So the battle just ended. I'm going to Abyssin Ornament. I pull out an alien. I'm going to slow this down, actually. Sorry. So I pull out a Lobel. It doesn't really even matter. But what matters is now I can set up this tracking. So I have 9 cards left in my reserve deck. I have 8 cards in my used pile. When I played the Abyssin Ornament, I had 7 cards in my used pile. So the top card of my used pile is now an Abyssin Ornament,
which is a Destiny 5.
So it's a Destiny 5. It's going to be the end of my turn, and I'm going to recirculate. So I know that there's 2 ways you can do tracking. You can do bottom-up tracking or top-down tracking. So bottom-up tracking would be there's 7 cards below the Abyssin Ornament. So bottom up is if I want the 5 on top of my deck to draw it for a weapon destiny or a battle destiny or something that I need playing on the edge or off the edge or something like that, I could just activate down until I know that there's 8 cards left in my reserve deck. That's top down tracking. Or I could say there's 7 cards under Abyssin Ornament, so it's the 8th card from the bottom. They both get you to the same point. It's just that, as you'll see, if I'm just doing top down tracking, the top of my reserve deck will change the number of cards based on how many cards I activate or lose to force strains or something like that. So sometimes it's smarter to go from the bottom up and say I had 7 cards below Abyssin Ornament, because that number is not going to change, rather than say I have 9 cards above Abyssin Ornament. But so what you'll see here is, speed it up just a tiny bit because sometimes this is really slow. So his turn, he activates. He's going to force strain me for 2. So when I recirculate it, I have 17 cards. Again, there were 8 cards in my used pile, 9 cards in my reserve deck. So there's 9. If 9 cards down is the Abyssin Ornament, or 8 cards up, however you want to look at that. So he activates. He force strains me. So I could lose 2 cards off the top of my deck. I lose 1 from my hand, but so I lose 1 from my hand, and then I lose 1 from the top of my deck. Now I have 16 cards in my deck. So this is where I was saying sometimes it's better to go bottom up, because the Abyss and Ornament is still, there's still 7 cards below it, and it's the 8th
Right.
card from the bottom, whereas it's no longer 9 cards from the top. It's 8 cards from the top because I just lost one off the top of my deck.
You
So
wouldn't
the
want to
top of the
activate
deck is slowly changing the number, which sometimes can be easier to remember if you only have like a few cards in your reserve deck. Sometimes it can be harder to remember if you have like a lot, which so you kind of have to use both, for lack of a better term. So he does. So now I activated a force with this effect on his turn. Now I have 15 cards in my reserve deck. Again, Abyss and Ornament is still, there's still 7 cards below Abyss and Ornament, but now there's only 7 cards above Abyss and Ornament. Then he does some stuff, blah, blah, blah.
So just as you kind of go through it, there's a bunch of cards that, essentially you can get some to your used pile. That's how you can start tracking it. So there's like throw me enough to charge. You don't
want, once you get it into your used pile, you can figure out where it is in your, and you keep track of it. You used it. It was, you spent 3 force to force drain with battle order, and then you played something for 3 force, and then you played a out of commission. Out of commission's now the 7th card, right? There's 6 cards below it. So as long as you know how much you like, where it is when you put it into your used pile, when you recirculate, you can activate down to it. So like here, I activated 6 force. So Matt, where's the Abyss and Ornament?
How many cards are in your reserve deck now?
There's 9.
So it's 2 down, right?
Correct. So you successfully tracked the Abyss and Ornament, because there's still 7 cards below it. Which this is why I said sometimes it's easier. You can lose track of the card if you're trying to go top down sometimes. But if you had, say, maybe spent 3 force on your opponent's turn and then lost 2 force, like you'd still have to keep track of how much was used and how much was lost on. So you kind of track both numbers. It's not so much knowing the number, where the card is in your deck. It's knowing how many cards above or below it there are in your deck, so that you can activate down to that number. So
let's see what happens here.
Actually, not. I saved a force to in case he was going to relocate Obi-Wan here, because I have no way to actually get rid of Obi-Wan because he's ability 5 and it's very difficult. So I needed to be able to activate and use my +1 greater than defense value. So I had to like track this 5 for like the whole game, basically, until it became a point where I could shoot Obi-Wan with this. So that's really the end of this example. It was more just to show like a very simple, I'm playing 1 interrupt. Let's count both sides of above or below, to show you where the 5 is. I could gravel storm something and then have a 5 on top of my deck. Or I could play shocking information on a site here, and then that goes into my used pile. And now I know that there's 1 card and then Abyss and Ornament and then 7 cards and then a shocking information. And so that can help you when you activate. Like if I were to activate 2 force, now the Abyss and Ornament's on top of my force pile. If I use 2 force, now it goes to the bottom of my used pile and I can recirculate. And so you have to, so like the next part of tracking is tracking it across piles. So once you can figure out where it is in your deck and you can successfully keep track of cards in your deck, I would say the next skill that you would want to learn is how to keep track of that card as it moves from your reserve deck to force pile to used pile back to force or back to reserve deck.
Interesting. That can be a skill for another day, but I think this is probably a good way to end a really basic way of how to track cards. So going from used pile to reserve deck and then just keeping an eye. I think that the bottom down method seems to be easier for me. That's more intuitive to know there's 7 cards below it and that's the 8th card. But whatever works better for people. I'm trash at this myself, so I'm not good at this.
Yeah, like I said, it can get difficult. Like in this case, I don't have very many cards in my deck. This was a limited game of all the Jedi, so the decks are smaller. But maybe I, on my turn, activated 12 cards and I spend 7 of them and we battle and I swing with a lightsaber and I draw a destiny and then I sense something and then I retrieve a force and suddenly like my used pile's like 20 cards and then it recirculates. And so sometimes going bottom down can get harder because you're like, well, what did I do in this turn again? I spent this force for this and I did this and I retrieved this card and I drew this destiny and that. And so you're like trying to backtrack how many cards went in, especially if you weren't really paying attention. So you have to really pay attention when you track, because if you don't pay attention, you're like, how many cards did I have in my used pile last turn? Was it 12 or 14? And then if it was 14 and you only activate 12, you didn't activate to the 5. And if it was 12 and you activated 14, you blew past it again, or whatever it is. So you just have to keep track of it.
Makes sense.
No pun intended.
All right, well, let's leave it there. Let's not get too in the weeds here. I hope folks enjoyed the tutorial. Like, subscribe, check out Andy's longer video if you want to get really in depth on tracking. But otherwise, we'll see you next time.
Sounds good.